Well, hello. Thank you for joining me for today's workshop, Do Your Art. I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to the cultural councils that supported this project, specifically Wilbraham, Holbrook, Pembroke, Westboro, Wrentham, Concord, Norfolk, and Townsend. All 8 cultural councils in those towns chose to support this project, and I am so grateful for that support. I wanted to start today by telling you just a little bit about myself and to share with you my credentials for leading this workshop. I hope that you find the workshop informative and inspirational. So to begin, I wanted to tell you my background. I got my undergraduate degree in English and journalism at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I chose journalism as a minor to go with my English major and secondary ed because I wanted to learn a different way to write. I've always been fascinated with writing. However, one of the things that I discovered was I didn't want to interview people. I didn't want to be a reporter. But turns out after I graduated, I didn't end up getting a job as an English teacher or a reporter. I got a job working in a fabric store. I loved to sew. All through college, I made most of my own clothes. My mom had made my clothes before. She couldn't teach me how to sew, but there was something about knowing the possibilities from having worn her clothes for so many years. I think it's similar to how sons and daughters of actors often go into the field because they have seen their parents doing that job. I had my job at the fabric store for about 6 years. And one of the things that I started doing about halfway through that was making alterations and changes and corrections on some of the drapery and window treatment orders that the store fulfilled. Part of the store was for interior design, and people would come in and have the interior designers that worked there come out to their homes, spec window treatments, bed coverings, tablecloths, pillows, all that kind of thing. However, the workroom that worked for the store didn't acknowledge that they ever made a mistake. They always blamed someone else. And because I was pretty proficient at sewing, I remember one day they asked me if I would take on the job of making alterations. Maybe it was a hem that was too long or too short. Maybe it was a valance that was a little too wide or too narrow, whatever. And I said, sure, a little extra money can't hurt, doing the work from home. But because of that, I learned from the inside out how to make draperies. So after 6 years and after the birth of our son, I decided to go into making window treatments full time. 2 years later, when our daughter came along, my husband joined me in that business. And for 20 plus years, I made window treatments and he installed them. And just to give you an idea of some of those window treatments, it's the fancy kind of stuff that you see maybe behind, I like to say, behind the president in the Oval Office. This one actually appeared on the cover of a magazine. And here are some of the publications that our work ended up in. So this middle one, Bedroom and Bath, had that other room setting in it. This one down here is actually a hardcover book that some of my work ended up being in. So I have a deep love of sewing. I actually made the top that I'm currently wearing. Recently, I made capelets for my now daughter-in-law at her wedding. And I feel like the sewing fulfilled some of a need within me to be creative. But I often said to people, I sew so I can write, and I write so I can sew. The combination of those two different creative activities, maybe you can relate to that. The idea that a creative often works in a few different realms. After a while, I started reading a lot of books. I started reading books about creativity. I discovered Eric Meisel, who is an amazing author on the topic of creativity. And he published a book. I can't remember the name of the book right now, but in the back of it, he offered the opportunity for creatives and people who were interested in coaching to take on clients. Now, this was when the internet was just really getting started. I immediately said, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to work with clients. I wanted a global experience. Truth be told, I don't have a passport. I have been out of the country, but it was long before it was required to have a passport to go into Canada or Mexico. I sent an email to Dr. Meisel. I said, I would love this opportunity. And he sent back a list of some clients that had shared that they wanted to be coached. And I took on 3 clients from all over the world. I worked with Vivian, who is a writer from Madrid, Spain. I worked with Colleen, who was an installation artist from South Africa. And I worked with Eileen Healy, who is a fiddler and an artist working in Cork, Ireland. Recently, I asked some of these clients to if they would be interested in sharing a testimonial. And Colleen wrote, Bernadette was always encouraging and supportive. She helped me to gather the necessary tools to rejuvenate my creative spirit. I continue to be a major part of the thriving artistic scene in Cork City, where I live, teach, play music, and have a studio in Backwater Studios. And I teach life drawing, painting at Crawford College of Art. You can look up Eileen if you want to see some of her work. It is beautiful. Other people that I have coached closer to home, I worked with a musician who also writes poetry. And through our work together, she gained her first publication, and she has since published a book of poetry. It's kind of a workbook combination. You can look that up on Amazon and see just how great her poetry is. Nan wrote, Bernadette is the ultimate accomplished person I would recommend to have on anyone's team. She is kind, sensitive, thoughtful, talented, energetic, with a passionate and untiring work ethic. And then finally, last summer, I was working with an author who also happens to be an ER physician. And Alex wrote, I have had the pleasure of working with Bernadette Stockwell as my writing coach and mentor for the past year. And what a year it has been. Through a pandemic, Bernadette has been the shining light that kept me focused when everything else seemed to be pulling away my attention from writing. Alex since published a book called How to Get Your Doctor to Listen. And that is an ebook, a Kindle book that you can find on Amazon. And I share those things with you, definitely not to brag, but to explain why I feel so committed to what I do, working with clients, helping creatives in all genre to achieve goals, to make a difference, to gain happiness. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. And I want to share with you this presentation mostly is going to be this kind of low-tech showing different cards rather than the more typical electronic sharing a PowerPoint. I believe that in this virtual world, being able to see a face, hear a voice, see what goes right, what goes wrong, making it as real as it can be will make your experience of attending this workshop more meaningful. In today's session, we're going to look at pondering. I already talked about me, pondering, working with journaling, and also how can you measure your emotions. I'm going to share with you how you can actually gain an entire workday. I'm talking 8-hour day every week, and I'm going to call it Art Day. Then we'll have an activity where I will ask you to do something on your own. Whether you want to share with the group or not is completely up to you. The next thing we're going to talk about is presenting and what I mean by that. Then I'm going to ask you to think about a product that you want to focus on. So this product does not have to be, I don't know, thinking about like Apple, a product would be an iPhone or a book. If you're an author, the actual physical copy of one book would be a product. But for the purposes of the activity that I'm going to ask you to do, having in mind a product, a single thing for you to work on will be very useful. And then we're going to talk about choosing a trusted audience to share your product with. We're going to look at calendars and how useful they can be. Then I'll have another activity, which is asking you to write your own artist statement. And that's where the product comes into play. Rather than talking in a broad way about your career as a potter or a chef, a carpenter, a gardener, focusing in on one aspect of it can be very useful. Then we're going to have the folded paper exercise, which I share for the end. And finally, I have a little quote there. You're beyond help. I always like to start these lectures with that in mind. And the reason, I'm sorry, I got to start my timer so that I don't go over. The reason that I share this quote is because I feel that finding a coach or a mentor can be an essential part of your journey as an artist, creative, or maker. However, you need to be very careful about how you choose that particular person. If they are not well qualified, it can be extremely damaging. Well-meaning coaches can say things off the cuff and have devastating effects on their clients. Little story I'll share with you. Many, many years ago, I met a woman who wanted to get into coaching. I, as a creative, I'll say mostly an author, frustrated author, wanted to find a way that I could be more creative. She asked me if she could practice with me. I'm not going to say I was her guinea pig, but it was definitely experimental. There was no charge for the work. We met every week for 2 hours at a local coffee shop where she would ask me questions about my progress over the week, what I had done, how I had worked on meeting my goals. She knew that I wanted to finish a novel and get it published. But one day, one week, I had this flash of inspiration. Truly, truly. I wanted to find a way where I could inspire others to do their art. At the time, it didn't really feel like I wanted to be a creativity coach because I'm not sure that that was really a thing. Being a life coach, being a business coach, that was an emerging field, and that's what my friend was trying to get into. And I came up with all these ideas. I created a website. I developed an email plan. And this was long before we had things like funnels, email distribution lists, newsletters, e-newsletters. It was way before that became a common thing. I created a business card, created a flyer. At our next meeting, I was so excited to share what I had done with my coach. So I brought in my materials and I couldn't wait to tell her. I laid them out on the table and I said, "Look what I did this week." And her reaction was, "You're beyond help." I was cut to the core. Truly, I was hurt. I was so excited about my creativity and the direction that I had decided to go. She knew that my goal was to write a novel. What she didn't know was creatives often have this battle of what to do next and what to do first. I came away from that feeling unsteady, not sure what to do next. But I certainly had the rug pulled out from under me in terms of following this passion. I never did anything with that e-newsletter. I never did anything publicizing that website that I had created, purchased, set up. I still have copies of the 10 pages that I made. And you know what? They're still good. They're still good. And I never finished the novel, at least not with her. We stopped meeting very shortly after that. It just felt like a betrayal. So when you decide to find a coach or a mentor, make sure that it's somebody who is qualified, who is professional, and above all, who has an unwavering positive attitude. That is the one thing that is going to serve you well. Make sure that this person supports you. Yeah, they can guide you, cajole you, but also they should support your endeavors. Creatives are often creative in more than one genre, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So, what is your art form? What is the genre that you prefer to work in? Think about that. And if you're like me, you might not want to commit to just one. I often think of it in this way. If you have 2 or 3 or 4 children, you are not going to put one aside just so that you can nurture this one. We need to nurture all of our children. We need to give them all the support, the love, so that they each can flourish. Today, I want to help you define the art forms and think about a lot of different ways that you can be creative with those art forms. What is your goal? You probably have a lot of goals. At the end of today's exercise, you're going to choose one goal. And that is not to say you're choosing one child, but there is truth in working on one thing at a time. I'll talk about ways that you can divide up your day so that you can feed all those different ideas and so that you do keep all of them alive. But to finish first, focus on one thing. And what is getting in your way? What is the thing that is preventing you from taking a first, a second, a 10th step toward your goal? Sometimes it's fear of success, which sounds strange. But when you think about success, what could that mean? An actor, a successful actor, more than likely is going to have to relocate to one of those cities where actors live and get work. You can read countless stories of actors who move to LA in order to be able to audition. Sometimes they stay there. Sometimes when they have earned enough that they can maybe have two homes, they might live somewhere else part of the year. Fear of success often is a fear of leaving your tribe. You can have both. You don't have to give up one for the other. We often have a fear of failure. Nobody likes to fail, but nothing happens without taking the chance that you're going to fail. They say Thomas Edison failed 1,000 times when he was trying to perfect the light bulb that has come to be what it is today. In every failure, he said, well, I know one more way that doesn't work. So, what is getting in your way? Do you know what that thing is? Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can write about it. Sometimes things will emerge from that. What is your art form? What is your art form? I like to think of this little mnemonic. I think it's a mnemonic. Live life epically. Last summer, when I started doing these workshops, I only had live epically. And I realized I had forgotten a major genre of art, which is fiber, and was ridiculous because I am a seamstress. So the phrase live life epically talks about literary arts, visual arts, fiber arts, environmental art, performing arts, industrial arts, and culinary arts. Literary art is probably the most obvious, maybe not the most obvious, that's kind of a misspeak, but when we think of literature, we think of somebody who writes novels. Novels are all kind of subgenre: fantasy, sci-fi, romance, western, action, independent, loads of things. Short stories, another form of literary art. Plays, screenplays, one-act plays, very short plays. Flash fiction, very, very short stories. Also nonfiction, which can be novel length, or it can be an essay or an article. All of that, literary arts. Basically anything that involves words. Poetry, I almost forgot. And all the different subgenre in poetry: haiku, sonnet, free form, free verse. I remember a long type of poetry, I think it was called an epithalamium. I'll have to check how to actually pronounce that. Anything that has to do with words goes under the category of literary arts. And we have visual art. Visual art includes painting, but painting can be oil painting, acrylic, watercolor, collage. We can also have fiber in visual arts, a wall hanging made out of quilt pieces, or different textures. Basically, visual art is something we probably hang on the wall, and it probably is wordless, although there's plenty of visual art that incorporates text. Literary art is easy to hide. I know because I have quite a few novels on my hard drive that's exactly where they remain, not quite ready for the real world. But visual art is harder to hide. Yes, you can have digital art. I love to do drawings on an app called Procreate on my iPad. And sometimes, like this, I can have them printed out and then they can be on display. Visual artists often have their homes filled with canvases. Up until a couple months ago, my mother's house was filled with canvases. She is a painter. She works primarily in oils, but also acrylics and every now and then watercolor. She had her paintings stacked up all around her living room, in front of the fireplace that she never used, in front of the TV stand. Last November, I think it was, I asked my husband if he would take on the task of hanging her paintings on the wall. And now her living room looks more like a gallery or a museum. Sometimes there's three or four paintings stacked up, one after the other. So when you walk into her house, the living room, her bedroom, her guest room, the walls are covered with her art. She's 95. She doesn't have an opportunity to get out and try to peddle much of her work these days, but she still continues to love the activity of making art. Fiber art has to do with anything that uses fiber: crocheting, knitting, weaving, what's that called? Punching with wool, felting, sewing. Very often, fiber art is also wearable art, where we might have surface embellishment, painting, patchwork, applique, quilting. I love to wear my wearable art out in public. And I love when somebody says, "Oh, I really like that." And I get to say, "Thank you, I made it." A little sense of pride there. Environmental art is anything that has to do with our environment. It could be interior design. It can also be a landscape architecture. Think about beautiful gardens. Think about walkways. Think about a Japanese garden with pebbles. Anything that you can be in the environment, and the purpose of that environment is to emote from the people that happen to be there. Interior design, I know from working with interior designers for many years, the purpose is so that when a family, when an individual, when a couple is in a specific space, that they feel good. That's the whole idea. Something that helps us to appreciate where we are. Does not have to be inside, can be outside. Performing art has to do with things that are shared often in a kind of ethereal way. Think about the most recent concert that you attended. When you're there in person and you're experiencing what the musician is making, the sounds, and how you and everybody in the audience is experiencing that, is a magical, beautiful thing. Just like going to a play. And it doesn't matter if it's a first grade production or if it's on Broadway. The idea of seeing people, live people up on stage performing, beautiful. Performing can also be things that are recorded, TV shows, movies. Sometimes it involves music, sometimes it involves the literary arts, sometimes it can also involve visual. We have sets, environmental, how the stage is set up, how the flats are moved, how scenes are changed. Anything that includes a performer sharing for an audience is performing. Industrial art, I think of as things that are working with hard materials. These materials may not necessarily be hard, but I'm considering things like a carpenter, a furniture maker, a glass blower, a potter, a metal worker, working and manipulating materials and repurposing, recreating so that they take a new form. Very often industrial arts also require tools. I think it's one of the arts that I have never really dabbled into. I have I think a fear of saws and losing a digit. And then culinary art, being working with food. For me, I love to dabble in culinary art. I love to play around, trying out different recipes. I love cookbooks. I love watching cooking shows. I love learning new things. I would never want to open a restaurant. That is like number one, no thank you. That is probably, I think, the hardest job in the world. But I admire so much those people who do that job. Everything from working in McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, to fine Michelin star chefs. The idea that you are using chemistry and aesthetics to put together food that sustains us is also quite magical. So we have all of these 7 different art forms, and wherever you fall, you may not, like me, want to choose just one. So do them all. Try out something new and different. I am working on a book that's called Do Your Art. And the purpose of this book is to help creatives step through a progressive series of tasks so that they can level up. My editor, when he was reading my book draft last summer, texted me. He was on a flight from Tennessee to, I think it was Colorado, and he texted me and he said, "This is a process book. This is so unique," which I found so gratifying. Todd Bryson is a well-known author in the field of creativity. He wrote a wonderful book called The Creative's Curse, which is my first experience in getting to know him. And since then, he took me on as one of his clients, working with refining, revising my book, which also happens to be on the topic of creativity. I came up with these 10 steps, and in my book, I have 10 chapters, each one devoted to one of these steps. The bottom level is about motivation, and how do we maintain motivation to keep doing the job, to keep practicing our craft, our art form. You've probably heard of the 10,000 hours. I remember Ira Glass talking about his experience coming up from a journalist, starting, I think, at NPR when he was just 19 years old, to where he is now with the well awarded radio show and podcast, This American Life, Ira talks about nobody is good at first. And I'll paraphrase, you have to be willing to do it badly in order to be good. You can search on YouTube, Ira Glass and creativity, and he plays some of his radio announcing stories early on in his career and how stilted and unnatural it sounded. But then we know where he has come to now. If you are willing to put in the time, you will progress. Maintaining the motivation to keep going is number one. I suggest we start not by doing our craft or our art, but take some time to reflect and ponder on that art. This can be written. You could do it in an audio recording. I suppose you could do it in different art forms too, drawing. But take the time to ponder what it is that you are doing, what your motivation is, where you want to go, and just free write. When we allow ourselves to just put down words and not self-edit, things come out, especially the more you do. Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way suggests that we try morning pages, 3 pages written longhand. When I have done that, I always discover about halfway down page 2 that that's when the magic happens. That's when the idea, the spark becomes real and tangible. From there, I suggest that you play. Have fun. Whatever your art form, try something new and different. Let your mind wander. If you're a novelist, you might want to try writing flash fiction, or you might want to try a different art form, maybe gardening, maybe cooking. And if you're a chef, you might want to try writing, or maybe it's going to be glass blowing, building a pot. Play, have fun, experience the joy of your art. Then we have to move on to planning. The old adage, a ship without a destination can just sail aimlessly. It is never going to get to where you want to go without a plan. And I have some very specific, easy to follow ideas for planning. At the end of the motivation level, I'd like you to present. And this isn't to a huge audience. I would like you to find a trusted friend. Make a date, tell them what you're up to. Perhaps you're working on a capsule wardrobe and you want to present to them your blouse or a shirt. You're not looking for criticism. You're not looking for feedback. The idea is we set a specific date and you work toward that date. This is practice for the upper level, which is to perform. Yes, that is the end goal. Let me explain everything in the middle before you freak out and say, no way. So present to a trusted friend. Make sure that they understand. I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to be there. Be my sounding board. I am not looking for feedback or a critique. I just want the experience of sharing. And the experience of working toward a specific date. That's very important. So you might want to, back here when you're pondering, if each of these takes a week to 10 days, that feels comfortable, get out your calendar and look ahead. Maybe it's 3 weeks, maybe it's 30 days, but figure out a date, contact your trusted audience of one, make a date and stick to it. Decide on where you're going to go, the time, and hopefully you are choosing somebody that doesn't cancel, especially last minute, because that's no fun. From there, we're going to move up to the next level, which is mobilization. So this is after we have gained momentum in motivation, we need to mobilize towards something more tangible. First, I want you to pause. And in pausing, I'd like you to repeat these 3 steps. Ponder again, play some more, and plan. And now that you have gone through your little presentation, you have the ideas of what is involved. So pause, rethink, take a breath, especially having just done this presentation. You might want to debrief. You might want to decompress. You definitely want to write about it and focus on the positive. If things didn't go right, acknowledge that, but begin and end with some positive remarks. You did it. You followed through. You fulfilled your commitment, and that is something to celebrate. Then we're going to partner. You shared with a trusted audience of one, but that person may not be working in the same art form that you want to work on for this project. See if you can find a partner. I have a writer friend, Jack, and every night Jack texts me with how many words he wrote on any given day. And then I usually will text him back with my word count. And we keep each other honest with these little check-ins. So find a partner working in the same art form that you are and share with them what your goals are. They may have different goals, but the accountability that you receive from working with a partner will also keep you motivated, keep you going. And when things get rough, you can always cry on your partner's shoulder, and they should be supportive and help you through that. Next, we're going to prepare. And here we are beginning to prepare for the performance. Again, if these each is about a week, 10 days, then this is also about 4 weeks in the future. How are you going to prepare for that performance? What do you need to do? A performance can take a lot of different forms. My son recently got married, and a wedding is a huge performance. It's a beautiful thing. It's a celebration, but everything that is involved must go into that specific time when the couple is standing before the officiant. A concert is a performance, a play is a performance, but also we can have a fashion show where we might have our fiber art. We can have a gallery show. There are loads of little galleries, big galleries, all throughout our wonderful Commonwealth of Massachusetts. See if you can get into one of those, if that's your art form, a visual art. My friend Kim has been a pastel artist for many, many years. That's not her primary field. She is a hydrogeologist, but she loves to make pastel paintings. And I've been to many of her openings where a gallery will take and display 10, 12, 15 of her paintings. And usually there is an opening date for that. My friend Lynn is also a fine oil painter, and she has participated in many juried shows, which also very often have an opening night. So that is the performance. But a gardener can also have a performance. Maybe they're planning to have a little garden party. My brother in law is, I think, a master gardener. He took a lot of ideas and techniques from his own mother, my husband's mom, and his yard is beautiful. One year, his garden club had approached him and said, "We'd like to include you on this year's garden tour," which was their biggest fundraiser. And Bud said, "No, not this year, next year," which in many ways gave him the time, because gardening does take time, to put together the different things that he had often thought about, but now he had the impetus to realize for the performance. My husband and I have recently been watching the Magnolia Network, which has amazing shows. And one of the ones that we enjoy very much is The Lost Kitchen. Erin French is a self-taught chef. And if you've seen the show, you know what I'm talking about. Her chef skills seem otherworldly to me. She has a restaurant in Freedom, Maine that is so popular that you can only get a reservation by lottery. In April and May, you have to mail a postcard, and then they choose by lottery who is going to be joining them at some future date. They are only open in the summer, and I think it's one of my big goals to be able to dine there. And she says she wants to give her clients a once in a lifetime experience. But she started her career in the culinary arts by doing pop-up dinners at friends' houses. After that, she bought an Airstream trailer and converted it into kind of a upscale food truck. And she would go to different locations to serve food and dinners. If your art form is culinary, you might want to host a dinner party at your home or maybe at a friend's house. You might want to take on catering or making a wedding cake or a birthday cake. Just try it out. Again, a specific date, a specific place, that's your performance. After you have prepared, now you're going to think about polishing whatever it is that you're working on. When we know what we're working toward, that's when we take the time to polish. Polishing can take many different forms. I love the word polish because it sort of puts in my mind make shiny, make smooth, make pretty. A performance can be polished by practice. I have never been an actor. I've never been up on stage. But I know that the actors will rehearse over and over and over so that their lines almost become muscle memory. And that's when you do well. Not that you do it without thinking, but so that you feel comfortable. You're not worried about saying the words and the lines right. A few years ago, well, quite a few years ago, over 20 years ago, I was taking clarinet lessons. And my teacher, Paul Surapine, said one day when I was taking lessons on bass clarinet, "How about doing the recital in May or June?" I was a 40-year-old mother with a business. I was taking these bass clarinet lessons just as kind of an activity. My kids We're both taking music lessons at the same music school. I had never performed in a solo recital. I had never taken private lessons when I was in high school. That would have been an expense that my family couldn't afford. For some reason, when he suggested that, my first reaction was, no, no, thank you. And he said, no, I think you can. I think you're ready. And what I didn't understand is how that would change my practice time. Truthfully, I hadn't been practicing very much. Paul was having me work on things that were definitely over my head. Having been somebody who hadn't really played a musical instrument since I graduated from high school. And now I was going to be the one up on stage in front of an audience. So I started practicing with more regularity, with more intention, and I did it. I did it. I did a solo show. I mean, a solo performance in a recital with a lot of other student musicians. I wasn't great. I wasn't perfect by any means, but I accomplished it. And that's the kind of thing, the purpose of working toward a performance. You will polish whatever your art form is. If it's doing a fashion show, you are going to pull together all the different pieces. You're going to trim every thread. You're going to press the sleeves, the lapels, so that it looks perfect. Painting, you're going to make sure that every piece is framed. Pottery, maybe you're going to put together a show of your pottery. You're going to make sure that it's displayed properly. A chef, you're going to make sure that you have plans so that all the food comes out at the right time, at the right temperature, plated on the right plates. A gardener, you're going to make sure that everything is watered so that it can sustain whatever its beautiful essence is. What else am I forgetting? Literary art, you could do a reading. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Maybe you're going to have a cookout. You invite 8 or 10 friends, but tell them, I'm working on a novel and I want to read a chapter as part of this activity. For one thing, I guarantee they're going to say, wow, you've got guts. And that's good. That's great. Also, I almost guarantee they're going to be a little jealous that you are working toward your art. Do your art. Beautiful thing. From polishing, we're going to work on publishing. Now, this is one area that my editor, Todd Bryson, disagrees with. That's because he's a writer. He told me publishing is the pinnacle. I know what that means, but also kind of a protected element. Writers seek to be published. That is when their words are separated from them. They go off to live their life without the author. Now, I'm not talking about that to the extreme level, but maybe a better way to think of it is to make public. Whatever your art form, live life epically. Literary, visual, fiber, environmental, performing, industrial, culinary. Live life epically. Make public for an audience who may critique you whether you want them to or not. Maybe it's going to be something larger. Maybe you're going to be part of an open mic or a larger fashion show or a larger art show or a garden tour or a tasting event. Taste of the Town is a pretty common fundraiser. So making public, and then we're ready for that performance. All right, so it's a matter of leveling up motivation, mobilization, and manifestation. Manifestation when the intangible becomes tangible. All right. So how are you going to accomplish these things? And what are you going to do in order to make sure that you can get the time to do your art? This is a planner that I put together. I wrote an article about it. I'm pretty sure the title is The 20-Minute Solution. I think you can find it on Medium. I will include a link when I post this recording to YouTube. The idea is we are all given 24 hours every day. You know people who do a lot, and you probably also know people who don't do a lot, who aren't that accomplished. They have other things that they're working on, but you are an artist, creator, maker who wants to do more. I divided the day into 20-minute segments. I start at 6 a.m. and I go until 11 p.m. Every hour we have 20 minutes. If you have read the book called the Pomodoro technique, where they divide the hour 50 minutes and then 10-minute break, 50 minutes and 10-minute break. This is similar. I find 20 minutes is a good amount of time to get quite a bit done. If I'm writing, I can probably write 250 to 300 words in 20 minutes, sometimes more. First step, on any given day, decide on 3 20-minute segments that you're going to devote to your art. First, it's just like a savings account. If you're trying to save money, you are not successful if you decide to save what's left at the end of the week. You are much more successful if you decide to put away 10, 15, 20% at the beginning of the week. Then you adjust your budget to meet the money that you have left. It's proven. The same is true for the 20-minute solution. Decide and guard those 20-minute segments. Often for me, it's the beginning of the day, but lately it hasn't been. Sometimes I have to carve out time in the afternoon. Sometimes it's in the evening. You know what's going to work best, but write it in. I'd use red, make sure that it stands out. Sometimes we can do it all at once, but a lot of times we can't. If you were to say to anybody, just take an hour every day to work on your art, a lot of people are going to struggle to come up with that hour. But if you say, can you devote 20 minutes? They will say, yeah, I can do 20 minutes. So take 20 minutes, figure out where you can put it throughout your day. Some art forms are going to be much more difficult to do this with. Things like pottery, where you're working with wet, soft clay. If you are lucky, it probably takes 20 minutes just to get started. Oil painters, probably the same. But a lot of art forms, even those, if you were to take 20 minutes and maybe a couple times a week, those 20 minutes are for planning, 20 minutes for cleanup, still, if you do that every day, at the end of the week, you will have devoted 7 hours to your art form. And then maybe on the weekends, maybe on a slow night where you decide not to watch Netflix, add another hour. That's how you're going to get art day every week. Imagine that. Your 8-hour workday, now you have an 8-hour workday for your art. It's mind-blowing what you will accomplish. I also include other things that I need to do on any given day. That may include my work day. That also includes meals. It will include morning meditation, evening meditation. I firmly believe in that. It includes exercise. I love going for hikes, and I usually try to devote 40 to 60 minutes every day for that kind of physical activity. It's all important. I like to use different color pens for the different activities. You do you, whatever works. I'm pretty sure you can download this PDF on my website, doyourart.org. If not, I will make sure that I get it posted there very soon. Up at the top, I have 10 lines where you can write out your to-do list. I really think that 10 items on a to-do list is probably too many. Some people think that 1 item is a good amount. Some people think that 5 is a good amount. I usually don't fill that up, but sometimes I do. And then I have a place for 5 goals. Hopefully these goals are things that you can maybe accomplish in a day or a week, and sometimes they can be your lofty goals. And then over here is a nice little area for calls that you have to make. For example, this morning I have been putting off calling our veterinarian to get a refill on our cat's medication. I had 10 extra minutes before I was going to get ready for this webinar. And I said, all right, just do it now. So I can cross that off. I like to have dates over here. This is something I designed. I just like the way it looks. It's something I've modified over the years. So give it a try. And that is all about Art Day. So the next thing, we've really talked about this, but I do want to just reiterate. We are moving from pondering to presenting to performing. And ultimately, that is the goal. Whatever your art form, you are going to perform. Okay, now is where we're going to have this activity. And we are running short of time, so I'm going to give you just 3 minutes to do this activity. I want you to pick one of these items and then write about it. It doesn't matter if you are a writer or not, but the activity of writing is a brain activity that tends to spawn more creativity. So write about your ideal day. Write about your dream house. Where would it be? How many rooms? Write about the best hour or the best minute. Exploding a scene is a literary technique. Write about your favorite scent. What does it remind you of? What does it bring back to you? What is your favorite sound? What brings you peace? What is your desert island book? What was your favorite toy as a child? This is a way to flash back to an earlier time, for many of us, a more carefree time. Or describe your favorite meal. And here I'm hoping to expand your sensory descriptions. All right, so choose any of these. I will give you 3 minutes. I'm going to set my timer if I can find it. I'm going to turn off my camera and then we'll check in. 3 minutes and you can go. About a minute left. All right. So I hope you found that activity useful. A lot of times my attendees will say, you know, it's been a long time since I put pen to paper or I typed on a keyboard just for the fun of writing. And they definitely appreciate that activity. Early on in the presentation, I talked about how being creative, doing art, can elevate your emotions, will make you happy. I proved this when I was working on my dissertation. I earned my doctorate from the University of Massachusetts in Lowell 3 years ago. My focus was on creative writing, and I wanted to include a way to understand the benefits of the activity of writing. Not many people had studied this. So I came up with this scale. I have 10 emotions over here, and then I have a Likert scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree at the top. My study was a case study. I had a student, an undergrad student. I had a recent graduate, both creative writing majors. And then I also had graduate students, a current grad student, and also a recent graduate from the same program in an MFA in creative writing. I included in my study an autoethnography, which is the study of self. In the end, I had 5 participants, these 4 people and myself. I asked everyone to devote 15 days to their reflection. And at the end of their creative writing session, to note their emotions. So the emotions ended up sometimes looking like this. So we have happiness, strongly agree, frustration, disagree, sadness, strongly disagree, pride, strongly agree. And then I figured out a way to quantify the emotions, which I still remember the morning when I was working on the dissertation and my study. It was a Saturday morning, and I was looking at this and I thought, I can put numbers on this. And I can start with like -2 to +2. And that's what I did. So here is my own graph over 15 days if you quantify the emotions at the end of a session. So here it was about a 12, and then it dipped down to maybe a 2, and then it went up to a 15, and you can see it's like up and down and up and down. And here is something called a graph of interquartile range. These are all 5 participants in the study, and it shows how different people, it's like your own personal best. We have outliers, they're called whiskers, but then we have the inner quadrant, and the lines in the middle is the actual midpoint. And in some cases, it's a little bit lopsided. But what this shows is that some people are always going to be in a tighter range. Emery was always like 12 and a half up to 16. Not a lot of difference. If you look at her graph, it wasn't up and down. And the captain also a little bit bigger, a little bit lower. And then this is me at the bottom. And I have a broad range of emotions. And I'm quite similar to Ruth, who was also, she had graduated from the same MFA program as myself. She was same gender, and she was also working on similar projects, novels. So maybe that's why ours compare. But what I would like you to consider doing is keeping track of your own emotions. And what I have started doing recently is tracking my emotions before a writing session and then at the end of a writing session. Every single time it goes up. Sometimes not a lot, but what I have discovered is doing art makes you happier. Think of it as self-medicating with art. I think it's healthier, and also it's going to produce beautiful works. Gardeners love to get out in the garden and get their fingernails dirty. A musician tends to feel better after they've practiced for a while. An artist taking the time to do their art, whatever your art form. So measure before and measure after. On my website, doyourart.org, I have a calculator that you can download. Since my study, I have expanded so that it's no longer strongly disagree to strongly agree. Now I have a measure of 0 to 10. So I'm going to share with you right now that calculator. And you can download, this is an Excel spreadsheet. You can download it yourself. And if you plug in the numbers on 0 to 10, it will calculate what it needs to do is something called reverse coding, because there are 4 positive emotions and 6 negative emotions. If everything was just 0 to 10, you wouldn't get a true indication. So theoretically, if you are extremely happy, you're going to score a 10. And if there is no frustration whatsoever, that's going to be a 0. And that should end up being a 100. When I do this for myself, I rarely get above an 80. But what I do notice is no matter how down I feel before a writing session, when I take note of it at the end, I always feel better. So for example, here, 7, I'm going to say frustrated, not too frustrated. Sad, I'm going to say 0. Sense of pride, I'm going to give that an 8. Anger and irritation, maybe I do feel a little frustrated. Well, that was above, wasn't it? I'm not angry, so I'm going to say a 1. Embarrassed, a 1. How enthusiastic right now? I'm an 8. Anxiety, well, sometimes that comes into play. Disgust, no. And then wonder, I'm often wondering. So this calculates the score as 82. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. So I would love to find somebody to create an app so that I could note this on my phone and keep a record of it. But I do this for myself, and I suggest that you give that a try. So go to my website, download that Excel program, and note how you feel. The next thing we're going to do is the activity of the artist statement. And I got this quote from the website, thecreativeindependent.com. What is an artist statement? An artist statement is a not too long series of sentences that describe what you make and why you make it. It's a stand-in for you, the artist, talking to someone about your work in a way that adds to their experience of viewing that work. Think of this as a little sign that's posted next to your painting, a landscape, a portrait, a still life. But it can also appear in a program for like a reading or a play. It might be in a menu if you're doing a pop-up dinner. It could also be shared with people who are strolling through your garden. It could be next to a pot that you threw. So very simple. This is what you need to do. And this is why at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about the product. Think of that one product. And then I want you to say, what is it? Answer that question. What? Why did you make it? And how? All right? Very simple. Participants from the past, when they did this artist statement, said that it was the first time that they ever had actually created an artist statement. My friend Teresa, who makes different cosmetics from bear fat, when she did this workshop last summer, she was thrilled that she actually came away with it, with this tangible artist statement. And her statement was really quite excellent. So we have just about 10 minutes left now. I'm going to give you another 3 minutes for this activity. And then we have just one more activity after that. So again, I'm going to start my timer, 3 minutes, and turn off my camera, and we'll check in again soon. All right. Because we're running short of time, I don't have time for you to share those in chat, but I do hope that you found this exercise useful, and I would love for you to email me your artist statement after the webinar ends today, after our workshop ends. I'll have my email address on the last little poster that I'll be sharing. We often have different kinds of people who lead us, who inspire us, who coach, who are our mentors. These three classifications are sage, Sherpa, and struggler. I remember hearing this from Carrie Oberbrunner, who is an author who often writes about inspiration. He said, these three categories are the kind of people who lead us, and we need to be careful when we think about signing up with somebody who is going to be our coach or our mentor. The sage is the expert. Think of them at the top of the hill. They know something, they have experience, they have education and training, and they are expounding on their knowledge to you, to their disciples, to their students. The Sherpa, if you think about the Sherpas that help people climb Mount Everest, they know a shortcut. They are the workers, but they know how to do it. They may not have gone to school. They know from their experience. They know from living in the climate. They know how to get the job done. Then we have the struggler. Strugglers are the people down and dirty doing the work. They can share their ideas because they also struggle to get their ideas done. If we talk about doing art, they are our fellow wanderers, artists, creatives, makers, making art just like you are. I used to consider myself a struggler because I'm not putting myself at the top saying I'm the sage, I'm going to tell you all the answers, and I'm not going to be the Sherpa. But now I like to prefer to think of myself as a striver. I am striving to get things done just like you are. And I have figured some things out. So that's what I wanted to share about that. If you're looking for a coach, understand what kind of coach they are. And before you sign on, remember the value of a good coach is everything. So the last exercise that I have for you is something called folded paper. So take a piece of paper, fold it in half, and then fold it in half again. And then on each quadrant, I'd like you to write a goal. We're going to do this real quick, but the power of this exercise is immense. I remember doing this exercise many, many years ago. I don't even remember where I found it, but I do remember the feeling that it gave me. So bear with me as we too work through this exercise. So I now have my piece of paper with 4 quadrants, and I'm going to write 4 things I'd like to accomplish this summer. Okay, so I'm going to say plant a garden. I'm going to say practice clarinet. I'm going to say write a cookbook. For many years, I've wanted to have a family cookbook. And then I'm going to say finish my book. All right, so I've got those 4 things written out in no particular order, because truly there is no order. So now I'm going to tear that into the 4 quadrants. The purpose of this is so that we can order them. We're going to put them in the order of least important to most important. So for me, it's going to be plant a garden is least important. Write a cookbook would be next. Practice clarinet, and then finish my book, which I think is my most important goal. That's 4 goals, 4 things. That's hard to do. So I'm going to say right now, take the least important one, just fold it, put it aside. Now you have 3 goals. All right. 3 goals is much easier to do than 4. Now I'm going to say, take the last 3rd one. Let's crumple it up and toss that out. So now you're left with 2. All right. Practice clarinet and finish my book. So I really don't have a reason to practice clarinet. I'm not in a choir anymore, so I'm going to put that aside. I can do it later. Now I have 1 goal, 1 thing that I want to accomplish. If you're following along, you have 1 thing that you want to accomplish, right? The most important goal. I want you to take that, crumple it up, and throw it away. How do you feel? How does it feel to throw away your number 1 goal? I'm guessing you're kind of devastated. I'm guessing you're probably surprised. But guess what? It's not gone. You can pick that up, you can flatten it out, and you can make it happen. So take that number 1 goal, tack it up on your mirror, tape it to the dashboard of your car, make it present, and figure out a way to accomplish. Use Art Day, work toward a performance. I gave you all the tips and tools in this workshop. Do your art. So if you remember the steps, first ponder, think about what you want to do, find your group. I have a vision of Tupperware party creativity parties across the country and around the world, where we have creatives and makers of all different genres who meet once a month and share in a performance what they have accomplished. I think we could change the world with art if we do that. Find a coach, find a reputable coach. Coaches come in many different sizes, but make sure that it's somebody with a positive attitude who is going to support you no matter what. Coaches charge from $75 an hour up to $1,500 an hour. But the value of working with a good coach is immeasurable. Stay in touch. Follow me on Instagram, Call the Writer. is my username. Send me an email. Join my mailing list. Go to doyourart.org and sign up. And when you sign my mailing list, you'll automatically get a PDF of my Do Your Art workbook. And send me an email, bstockwell@doyourart.org. So I hope that you have found today's session valuable. That's not the one I wanted. And I thank the cultural councils who supported this project. And once again, Townsend, Norfolk, Concord, Rentham, Westboro, Pembroke, Holbrook, and Wilbraham, all local agencies that are supported by the Massachusetts Cultural Council, a state agency. So thank you so much for spending your time with me. I hope you found it useful. Now go out and do your art.